One of my first memories of you is a very old post on AOC Zone. And the thread was about who were the best casters in the community. And much to my surprise, you answered that I was one of your favorite casters. Now, this was especially shocking to me because at the time, you were already working on the HD version, and I was casting on Voobly. And, back then, there was a bit of a rivalry between Voobly supporters and the HD version supporters. And sometimes people would say some pretty nasty and vile things about you and your team. And so for you to still have no problem stating publicly that one of your favorite casters was casting for the opposite team, I just remember thinking, man, this guy's got character. But speaking about dealing with criticism, someone who leads the development of a franchise as beloved as this one will always have to deal with lots of it. Does it ever get easier? Does it still hurt when you read something negative about the game that you think is unfair or uninformed?
There is a certain, people say you grow a thick skin after some time, and then there is truth to that. But it certainly still affects you, right? You can't just go through life and then be completely unaffected by criticism. It does weigh on you. And there's a lot of things that you read, and I'm like, well, that's not how it is, or that never happened like this. But I can't engage with every single person and say, like, no, you're wrong, or that's not the way it is. At some point, you just have to say, like, okay, I accept that. That's a way to view it. Maybe, try again and see if you have a different experience. But yeah, you do get used to it a tiny bit at least. Not too much, because it's very important that you still keep on listening to what is being said in the community. Like if I would just ignore everything and say, like, yeah, it's fine and we'll just do our thing, that would be terrible. So it's certainly a balance that you have to strike there.
hmm hmm So, Bert, you like most guys in their 30s, myself included, you've started playing the game in 1999, so pretty much when it came out.
Mhm.
And however, at first, you didn't play it for very long because you broke your CD. How did that even happen?
I don't know. I still remember the sound. I put a CD in my computer, and it was a shredding sound that I had never heard before. Uh, I
Never
tried to
happened to me.
stop it. I think my CD player still had like a stop button. That was a very old computer.
Uh-huh.
It came out and was just shred to pieces. The
Wow.
rest of the computer was intact, but the CD was not. That was very unfortunate. I had to stop playing for quite a few years at that point.
Uh-huh. Was it like love at first sight? Did you immediately enjoy playing it?
I did. Actually, the first time I played the game, I saw actually my uncle playing the game. And he was, I think he was playing the William Wallace campaign, and he was building some castles. This is literally my first memory of the game. He was playing and he was building some castles. He was under attack and the castle was on fire. And I asked him, like, hey, don't you need to extinguish the fire? And he was like, no, 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 no. And at that point, I was like, wait, what the hell? And I kind of left him alone for a bit. And afterwards, he said, like, hey, you want to play as well? I had to go at, I think it was the Wallace campaign, one of the scenarios. It took me probably like a few hours just to beat one of those missions.
Mhm.
But it was such good fun. And then I think the next opportunity I had, like a birthday or something, I was like, hey, I'd like that. I'd like that game.
Mhm, mhm. So I believe that must have been around 2006 that you rediscovered your love for the game and you start playing it again, right? Now, 2006 was exactly the year that Microsoft stopped supporting Age of Empires 2 online and the year the zone was closed. And so at that time, the community was sort of scattered around several third party platforms. And I believe you landed on Game Ranger, right? How active was the community on Game Ranger and what kinds of settings were popular there?
Back in the day, the way I actually got back into the community was I was having a drink at a bar with a friend, and we got chatting about Age of Empires. I have no idea how we got to that topic, but he was like, "Yeah, you can still play it online." Which, to be fair, before that I had only done like once or two times because I discovered it way too late. I was not really good at the game, or at least I had my own way of playing. Let's put it like that. Um, so I didn't really notice that the zone was gone. But he said, like, hey, you can play it. And it was like, hey, you want to come and play a game with me? I've got a few friends who play it as well. And so we played a few games and it was wonderful. Like
Mhm.
we absolutely sucked at it. But it was
Like
great.
most of us.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like I didn't feel bad. It was just fun to play multiplayer for the first time in many, many years.
Mm.
I don't even remember the settings that we used. I don't know if it was deathmatch or some like weird hybrid thingy. We certainly didn't know any build orders or of
Mhm.
any kind. It was just like, hey, fun game.
Mhm.
Um, but then looking at the community in Game Range, because I kind of stuck around. Like a friend at the time, he stopped playing mostly, but then I found other people in the community there and continued to play with them. And I think most of it was random maps, actually, and then some custom scenarios. CBA was
It's
huge.
big. Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
It's
one of the things that I find interesting about CBA is like it has a weird reputation, right? Like some people say like, no, don't play CBA. It's like a newbie game mode or whatever. And I give CBA a lot of credit for teaching me how to use unit counters.
Yeah, it's
Like,
interesting you mentioned that. You should have seen my interview with Dave. You know Dave,
uh,
of course.
yeah.
And he talked about it a bit. Why does CBA actually have such a bad reputation? You need to check that one. And you guys too need to check that one. But very interesting thing you just said before. You said that you hadn't actually played any multiplayer games before 2006. And I definitely remember you telling us that there was this figure that roughly 80% of people who own Age of Empires 2 never played a single online game. Does that figure still hold today, or you think there's been a shift towards more multiplayer?
I'm actually not sure. I haven't looked at that data specifically, but it certainly still holds true. Like there's a very very large part of the community that never goes into multiplayer.
Mhm.
We also have a large part that just plays campaigns. Like they barely bother to go into just a skirmish match. And that also kind of shows like how much the difference there is in people playing Age of Empires and enjoying it their way.
Mhm. Mhm. Um, I definitely remember seeing you on Voobly though. When did you move over?
I think it's Jesus. I can't put a year on it, but I remember at the time in Game Rage there were like a few people that were definitely getting better and getting way better than the rest. And one of those places was Eight Wonder.
Wow, he
He's
started on Game Ranger. That's
I
amazing.
think he started on Game Ranger. I remember playing quite a bit with him, a lot of Michi games with him as well. I loved Michi back in the day.
Mhm.
So we played there, and then he was like, "Hey, there's this other place where you can play, and there's a lot of way better players." So I checked it out as well, and I played for quite a bit there as well because yeah, it just gave you more of a challenge. It's not
Mhm.
always something I was looking for,
Mhm.
but if you wanted it, that was of course the place where you wanted to get better at the game.
Mhm. Mhm. I seem to remember you played a lot of Arena, so I assume
Mhm.
that's one of your favorite maps. What do you like so much about it?
I think what I really liked about Arena was, first of all, it allows for slower players to get to a better competitive level. Like I
Mhm.
was terrible at going back and forth. Well, I'm still terrible at going back and forth between economy and fight. And the knowledge that my economy is safe behind the walls really helped that.
Mhm.
I mean, just doing a 1 TC boom is literally having your TC on the hotkey and then making a villager once in a while. And for the rest, all your focus is on the front of the battle, and then you're pushed into the enemy's base. And I like that so much that I try to get good at it.
Mhm.
And also at the time, well, I say at the time, it's still the case. My favorite part of the game is like early Castle Age because at that point everything opens up. Like you have so many units, more units available to you, much more paths forward. A
I
lot
think
of the
that's
feudal
the part
ages.
most people struggle with too, right? When
Yeah.
suddenly there's a lot more focus on the economy, you can build multiple TCs or you can choose not to
Mhm.
do it.
Exactly. There's so much going on in the early Castle Age, and I like that part so much. And that's, of course, the part where you start to fight in arena. There are some meta changes, of course, like people have figured out how to do feudal rushes.
Mhm.
There's like the tower
Tower
hopping,
rushes.
all that stuff. Um, but in general, that was just so much fun. And Arabia at the time, and yeah, especially at the time, was all about flushing.
Hmm.
which I just couldn't keep up with. So I
Hmm.
found my niche. I like playing it.
Mhm. That's kind of ironic that you said one of the guys you played the most with was Eighth Wonder, because Eighth Wonder is the one guy credited with the with calling the arena specialists clowns, and so the fact that you enjoy arena and you played with Eighth Wonder is I find a lovely ironic thing. Anyway, did you watch any games from the Masters of Arena 6 that just recently finished?
I have been so behind on any competitive games because there's just so much going on. So no, unfortunately, I have not had the chance to look at those now.
That's actually a good thing because that means you've been working on our upcoming expansion.
Yes, that is absolutely true. I mean, I wake up very early. I start with age and I go to bed very late, stopping with age. And then in the weekends, there's sometimes age as well. But sometimes you need a bit of a break. So, so
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Bert, it was in 2011 that you started working on the Forgotten Empires mod, which, unbeknownst to you, would just a few years later become the first official expansion for Age of Empires 2 in over 10 years. Now, in 2011, you must have been either 22 or 23. So, what were you doing with your life back then? I know you were doing some bartending, but did you go to college? Did you have any other projects?
I was indeed bartending. At the time, I was working in a restaurant, also helping to clean tables, helping behind the bar, washing glasses. Very good old job. Let's put it like that. And yeah, I was a bit like, how should I say it? Unsure where to take my life at that point. And I was working on a mod, which was well, a fun side project. And I was also like applying for other jobs in IT while I was working in the bar. Um, but then the whole thing really exploded. Uh, like it started to prove to be something of a career point, something to go for. I'm not saying age in general, but I think right after I quit bartending, I had a job at Nintendo
Hmm.
and as a tester. And at the same time, we were developing, I think it was the African Kingdoms expansion. So I was really focused on trying to make something happen within the games industry. And having like the mods project exploding um, combined with working at Nintendo was a really, really good experience.
Hmm. You said you were trying to apply to IT jobs. Did you have any sort of education in the field?
I did, yeah, I did have a background. I did study, how do I say? I'm just going to say computer science. I did
Hmm.
not finish the degree though, so that definitely made it a bit harder to find those jobs. But it was an excellent gateway to the testing job at Nintendo.
Hmm. And did that help you with your work on the mod in any way? The fact that you had an education in IT?
It certainly helped me understand certain things, right? If you just come in blindly, but that makes it harder. But for example, one of the things that I did on the mod was like trying to reverse engineer parts the executable at the time. And having a bit of a background certainly helped.
Help.
Like
Hmm. Hmm.
I knew what assembly language looked like. I knew what it was. I knew how to kind of work with it. I was, of course, uh, I mean, after I've done these like little hacky tacky things in assembly, I came across with Scripter. He is,
Wow.
of
Okay.
course, yeah, a gazillion times better at that. I mean, user patches is the testament to that. Uh, but yeah, I definitely dabbled into that, and my IT background certainly came in handy.
Mhm. So I feel like we need to explain that. So Scripter, it's the I guess you know his real name. Most of us don't, and he's just like by all accounts this genius coder who created the user patch, and that's what most people were using when they were playing on Voobly, which offered all sorts of features like the spectator system we had on Voobly. And anyway, there was a bit of bad blood. Apparently, I don't want to go into that, but anyway, Scripter it was a very, very important person in the development of the Age of Empires community. And you mentioned your Nintendo job, and that's funny because that was in Germany, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Right. When was that exactly? How old were you when you moved to Germany?
I think I was 24 when I moved to Germany, and I moved to Frankfurt. And
Mm-hmm.
because, yeah, Nintendo of Europe has their headquarters there.
Mm-hmm.
Have a very big building with people from all over Europe to test and translate their games. That's really the focus of NOE, Nintendo of Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And I was working on the testing side there. Um, yeah, playing Nintendo games all day was basically my job description at the time.
I've known worse jobs than that.
Yep. It's I really enjoyed it. I think the nicest thing I did there was like, don't get me wrong, like testing can be a really rough job. It can be really hard because there are a lot of areas in a lot of games that are just not fun, or
Mm-hmm.
things to test
Mm-hmm.
that are not fun. Like, a lot of people have this fantasy that if you're a game tester, you're just doing the most fun things all day long. It's really not the case.
Not true. Mm-hmm.
I think the first half year I was reading manuals and like requirements for the plug that needs to go into your Game Boy or whatever. It's like, that's not exciting, but it's part of being a tester. Like, you need to see that all these things are correct.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, but I think at the very last, like my very last project at Nintendo was working on Mario Kart 8. And that was, I mean, that was their flagship, one of their flagship titles.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that was so much fun to work on. So
Yeah.
it's
I
really
mean,
lucky there.
first employer Nintendo, second employer Microsoft.
Yeah.
Damn. Damn. So you then eventually moved to Malaga in Spain, which I believe is where you are right now.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, I was just checking the weather in Malaga and before we
Okay.
started this, and it shows 34 degrees for today. And for our American friends, that would be 93 degrees Fahrenheit. Is it hard for you to deal with the summer heat in South Spain, which I know can be pretty brutal at times?
No, I love it. It's one of the reasons I actually left Germany, because it was so freaking cold. I had two very, very cold winters in a row, and I was going to Nintendo on my bike through the snow, and the cars were like running past me through the black slush, which sprayed on me. And I was like, oh, Jesus, I don't want to do this too much anymore. And yeah, there is no snow in Malaga ever. So there you go.
Yeah, they got pretty hard summers sometimes. Um, so the Forgotten Empires mod, it not only added new civs to the game, but it also introduced a decent number of changes to the game's balance. So was your work on the mod also motivated by your frustration over the state of the game's balance back in 2011?
It's weird because I still remember. And I actually use that post quite a bit to colleagues that start working at FE. There was a post for me back in, I want to say somewhere 2010-ish, where there was a conversation on AoE's. It was a super active topic, where people were talking like, hey, these are balance changes that we would love to do to Age of Empires. Now, at that time, there was no other balance patch effort going on. Like, nothing. Of course, there were a lot of people who had ideas and like, hey, I want to do this or I want to do that different. But there was no balance patch that had any following. But there was a conversation about it. I still remember saying like, I don't think this game should have any balance changes. We should just try to evolve the game tactically. And I'm very happy that I changed my mind there completely. Because indeed, after some time, you do see some things getting stale. You do see the same things over and over again. You do see some civilizations just having no viability at all. And I think it was mostly driven by that. Like, hey, if we're making new civilizations, why not make sure that some of the civilizations that are now completely underused also get to see some play? Because then you get, more novelty for a very, very low effort,
Hmm.
basically.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
can say, like, I mean, Koreans were the top example at the time. They were absolutely worthless. You just never saw them. I remember AoE back in the day, they had this search filter to look for games. And I was like, okay, I'm going to look for Korean games more than 1800 rated on Voobly. Let's see what comes up. And I had like a selection of 6 games or something.
Hmm. Hmm.
And most of the times the Koreans lost. It's like, come on, we have this whole civilization here with cool units, and we just don't see them.
You said you played Michi. Wasn't in Michi? Weren't Koreans like a top pick on Michi? Were there overpowered siege
I think they
onagers
were
and lava
banned most of the
towers?
time.
They were banned.
I think so, because they had like, yeah, the onagers and the bomber towers, and then the Orregas and the halberdiers. Um, I'm not entirely sure if they were banned, but they were certainly, yeah, they were top tier there. Absolutely.
I remember. I remember. Let me think. Turkish bombard towers were banned because they
Yes.
were deemed too OP. And I remember Persian elephants were banned too, but I don't
Okay.
remember Koreans being banned. But maybe
I
you must.
I think it depended on the house rules of whoever the host
Yeah,
was.
you're
Yeah.
right.
So
You're probably right. You're probably right. So, if today you weren't officially involved in the development of Age of Empires 2, would you be one of those guys spamming the AoE2 subreddit with balance posts every other day?
oh goodness me, I have no idea. I think one of the geez, that's an interesting question because I don't know. One of the interesting things that we have for sure is that we have a lot of more data to work with. We can look at what win rates are looking like, what pick rates are looking like, and there's some great community efforts out there. Like there's the AoE stats.io website.
Yeah,
Um, it
amazing,
paints a
amazing
picture.
website.
It paints a picture, but it's not complete. I think it has about, I want to say, between 10 and 30% of the data,
Hmm.
of the complete data. So it paints a picture, but it's not a complete picture.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it also helps the community in talking about balance. But we can look at, for example, well, okay, this is my most go-to and fun example. A new civilization comes out, right? People have a lot of opinions about balance. Especially with Burgundians and Sicilians, when those come out, it's like, oh Jesus, these are OP, these are OP. Um, both civilizations, I think, a month after release, Burgundians never made it past the bottom civ.
Hmm.
Sicilians was a bit higher, but they were never past, I'm going to say, the middle line. So they were never top tier. And even after that, most of the conversation was revolving around like, yeah, Sicilians are probably bottom tier. I think Burgundians have a bit more going for them. But we saw the complete opposite
Hmm.
at the time. And that's such a interesting thing to know. And of course, the community does not have that visibility. They don't have the data to back up their claims. It's more like, okay, this is something I experience.
Hmm.
And from my experience, it looks like this and this and this is the case. But then you look at, the results of 1,000 people or 100,000 people, and it paints a different picture.
Hmm.
And that's where
But
it gets really,
you
really
know why
interesting.
that is, right? You know why that is because
Oh yeah,
for over 20 years we haven't had any of that. So we're
yeah,
used to rely on the anecdotal evidence of top players
yeah.
or people who know the game very well. But I totally agree. I think we talk way too much about how someone feels about a civ, and we look way too little directly at the numbers. But it's pretty ironic to think about it now. But when you guys finally released the Forgotten Empires mod in 2012, after a while, I clearly remember thinking the release was a major failure. And the reason I thought this was because barely anyone was playing it on Voobly. And being as ignorant as I was back then, I thought that if something was not successful on Voobly, then it had to be a failure. Well, what I did not know was that the mod would go on to hit 1 million downloads, which must have been mind blowing, even for you. Now, the Forgotten Empires was just a mod, so it still required people to own a copy of Age of Empires 2, right? And back then, AoE2 was not yet available on Steam. So, who were these 1 million people who downloaded the mod? Just people who happened to still have the old CD laying around?
That's what my guess was. Like, I have still no idea to an extent where, I mean, yes and no. Like, I didn't talk to those people; they just appeared, right? Like all of a sudden, people were downloading, our website crashed. I had no idea what was happening, and I think at that point, and we really realized, Jesus, there's just so many hidden Age of Empires 2 players. And Voobly at the time had, of course, the whole, I was going to say cosmetic, competitive
Competitive, yeah.
segment of the player base. And then you had Game Range, which was more like the casual multiplayer crowd. But all that together was that maybe 5% of the players that were still hiding around the world, people that we just didn't know existed, people that we don't know how to reach. That's kind of what I'm thinking, because there were so many people who would just fire up a CD and play the Joan of Arc campaign
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
play against the AI. I certainly was like that as well. Before rediscovering the game, I was like, hey, once in a while, I just want to play against the AI.
Hmm. Hmm.
Every time I had a new computer, I was like, oh, can my new computer actually run the game again?
Hmm.
Um, I still remember when my very first computer, I had to play, I think it was 1v4 AIs, and I couldn't go beyond that because my computer just couldn't run it.
Wouldn't handle it. Hmm.
Yeah, so it's that crowd that we now also reach with we reached with HD and now with DE as well.
Hmm.
Um, all these people that you just never see uh, in multiplayer.
Hmm. It's just unbelievable to think there are so many of them, right? So after releasing the mod in late 2012 and seeing what a tremendous success it was, you guys decide to contact Microsoft in hopes they would be interested in it. Now, the timing could not have been better because what you guys did not know at the time was that Microsoft was indeed already working on a remaster of Age of Empires 2, which would be released in late 2013 under the name AoE2 HD. Were you guys even expecting an answer?
Um, Yes and no, because we were confident that if the mod, without any official support, could get 1 million downloads. Um, I mean, as back in the day, we had no idea what that meant, right? Like
Hmm.
maybe Microsoft looked at 1 million and they were like, "Yeah, whatever." We were expecting to sell 100 million
Hmm.
copies.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, we had no idea, but for us, that looked like a lot.
Hmm.
So we expected something. Um, it did come. So in the end, I guess yes. Um, but I mean, it was still a long shot,
Hmm.
obviously. Like
Hmm.
we had no idea who to even contact. Like uh, we had to look it up on, I think it was on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn, yeah.
Uh,
Hmm.
and we're trying to find, okay, who do we contact? Who can we actually, like, you can't send a mail to Microsoft. You can't go build.gates@microsoft.com and it will arrive. No, it's like, how do you contact Microsoft?
Hmm.
So
Hmm. Yeah. So, do you still remember what you were doing when the phone call or the email came confirming that they were interested?
um, I think it was just more something like, yeah, let's talk. And it was like, it was pretty dry. Like I
Uh-huh.
didn't really know what to expect from it. And it took quite some time before it got any traction. Like I think it took months before there was any movement there.
Hmm.
And at the time we were just, yeah, working on polishing and then bringing like little patches uh, to the mod. So
Hmm. Hmm. So, in terms of sales, the release of the HD edition was again a huge success. How many copies did it sell?
I have no idea. That is something that Microsoft obviously knows, but I have no idea about sales numbers.
They don't. Okay. Okay. Well, I remember. Anyway, so when Microsoft hired you to work on the HD edition, was it already clear you would get to work on further expansions, or was it still dependent on how well the Forgotten would sell? And the Forgotten was just how Microsoft decided to name the Forgotten Empires mod once it became official.
Um, okay, this is a different story. This is the story on why the company is called Forgotten Empires. Basically, when we were asked to make the mod official, to make it an official expansion, Microsoft came to us and they were like, "Yeah, we can't do business with individuals. You need to make a company out of
Hmm.
that." So we're like, "Okay, we'll make a company. What do we name our company?" We're like, "Well, we're trying to make this mod and sell this mod, so let's name it Forgotten Empires."
Hmm.
Um, and we did that. And then afterwards, we're like, okay, seems we're done. Uh, I actually was on holiday at the time. I was in a hammock in the desert in
Hmm.
Peru at the time.
Wow. Wow.
And then got a call from Microsoft. And it's like, hey, you want to do another expansion? Uh, and I was laying there in the desert with barely any reception. I was like, okay, I've got some ideas. Let's talk again in 2 weeks once I'm out of the desert, and then we'll talk about this.
Mhm. So you think it was still dependent on how well the Forgotten was about to sell, or was it pretty clear from the start you would get to work on further expansions?
It was not clear at all. No, I
Hmm.
mean that's why we didn't even think about the company name, right? Like
Hmm.
we just thought it was going to be this one thing, and then we're done. Uh, we never even expected that there would be more.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
so I don't know what drove the decision. I just know that our producer at the time, Ryan Shapley, he was he was really really passionate about the game. Like he really wanted to grow it. He really wanted to make it more. And I think that was kind of what drove it as well.
Hmm.
Somebody on the Microsoft side who really wanted to champion for Age,
Hmm.
and yeah, keep on growing it. So I think that definitely drove it as well.
Right. So you did get to work on further expansions. So after the release of The Forgotten, we got the African Kingdoms in 2015, and then later in 2016, I believe it was, the Rise of the Rajas expansion. But Bert, despite all the success in sales and all the new content, the HD version was never able to lure, was never able to get the professional players to move over from Voobly. And in fact, what very often ended up happening was that when someone was getting really good on HD, they would switch to Voobly. So this is what happened to people like Leary or Hart or Project Belgium and many others. And so this meant that most major tournaments were still being played on Voobly. And the reason for that is that most people agreed Voobly offered better features for the multiplayer experience. It had a better spectator system, every player had a profile in the platform. The performance of the game tended to be a bit more stable with less crashes, and this was, again, mainly due to the brilliant work of the user patch team. Now, with the release of the DE version, you guys have shown us that it is possible to have at least some of these things outside of Voobly. So, why were these features not available in the HD version?
Ooh, that's a very difficult question to answer for sure. So
Take your time.
yeah, basically for any project that is not a hobby project, user patch is a hobby project, right? Like people do uh, what they want to do. There are no constraints. And that was something we had with the Forgotten mod as well. Like we just did what we wanted to do. That absolutely took part of the success. However, as soon as you go to a commercial product, things are very different. You have different goals. You have different constraints. Constraint can be time or budget, something as simple as that. It can be a company goal as well. It can be like, hey, we here at Microsoft, I'm not saying that this happened, by the way, I'm just
Hmm.
saying
Hmm.
these are
Hmm.
potential constraints. We here at Microsoft believe that every game needs to be available on Xbox, and we're no longer going to make any PC games. That's not the case. But if that's the case, and you've just done things for a PC game, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, what's my future on this PC game going to be? And there's so many factors that come together once you work on a commercial product that you just constantly need to fight those things. And in
Hmm.
the meantime, still trying to deliver the best product possible. Now, that is something, a lot of those constraints change with the E, as we've seen. Like, it's a big project, bigger budget, more people, more time. Um, and that certainly helped in showing, like, hey, there, we can do that,
Hmm.
absolutely.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and I think the E is also a testament of that. Like, if it is possible.
Absolutely. So, not having the major tournaments being played on the HD version also meant pro players were playing tournaments only with the old civs and with the old balance. So none of the new civs were being featured in the big tournaments back then. So did that make you lose interest in the professional scene, or did you still get to watch most of the big tournaments?
Oh, I still watched. It was indeed like unfortunate. Like, of course, you want to see the new things in action, but it's also always nice to see how pro players play. I mean, I just like watching Age of Empires. I can't do it because at
It's
all
so
times
fun.
because I
It's
just
so
have
fun
so
to
much work
watch.
to do. But it is a nice game to spectate.
Yeah, I
And
will. I think so too. I don't think it's slow paced at all. I think it's actually lovely the way it builds up. No, that's just my opinion, of course. Now, Bert, later on, things did start to change with the increased popularity of the YOLO Kingdoms mod, which allowed Voobly players to play with the new civs and with the new balance. And I believe King of the Desert 2 was the first major tournament to be played with the YOLO Kingdoms mod. Were there any favorite tournaments of yours during this time period before DE came out?
I really can't pinpoint any favorite there. I just remember like watching, but it's been so long ago that I
It's
can't
a
really
long
say,
time ago.
"Oh, this was a great game" or "This was a great tournament." Um, I mean, sometimes I don't remember what I did last week. So,
Fair enough. Fair enough.
yeah.
So, with the release of the definitive edition, Microsoft does seem to be more invested and more interested in the multiplayer and competitive side of the game. And all those features that were missing from the HD edition are now present in DE, and you guys have also added some great new features that most of us didn't even realize we were missing. And Microsoft now also sponsors tournaments regularly. So, what has caused this shift in approach by Microsoft? And did the growth of some Twitch streamers like T90, Viper, Nearly Memp, and the explosion in viewership numbers, did that play a role?
I think the major part of that was just Microsoft putting their shoulders underneath the whole franchise, not specifically H2. H2 certainly proved to Microsoft and HD to a very large extent as well. Like there is still something here. This is not a dead IP. This is not something that is there and enjoyed by a few people. This is enjoyed by a lot of people. And when Microsoft decided to go for the DEs and well, now Age of Empires 4, that was really the start of a massive change
Hmm. Hmm.
internally at Microsoft, and that then also showed um, to the community. Like if I compare ourselves working on the expansions back in the day on HD, and then now what we're doing on DE, like the size of the team is
It's
you
bigger.
can't compare it.
Hmm.
It's day and night difference, and yeah, that luckily also shows. But I
Hmm.
think that was the largest change. It's certainly thanks to Age of Empires 2 in the community, like to show that it's still there. Um, but yeah, it required some people at Microsoft to say like, hey, this is something we can do something with.
Hmm. Uh, However, Bert, I'm a little bit more interested on the multiplayer side because, I mean, as you said, HD showed everybody that the game has still lot of potential. Um, But why then in DE? I mean, one of the biggest shift is indeed that a lot more investment has been made towards the multiplayer side. So, what has changed in Microsoft's? What caused Microsoft to change their approach towards the competitive side specifically? Do you think Twitch had any involvement in it and
Yes.
tournaments? Okay.
Absolutely. Nowadays, a lot of, I mean, just look at video game marketing 20 years ago, right? You had video game magazines, and that's how you would learn about a new game. And now you go to Twitch and just go to the most viewed games, and you know what's new.
Hmm.
Uh, it's such a shift in how games are shown to the world, and the fact that a 20-year-old game that is part of their portfolio is still running on Twitch. I'm quite sure that helped.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and it is, well, we said it before, it is a nice game to look at.
Yeah.
So there is potential.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. So, in my personal opinion, the release of the definitive edition is one of the best things to ever happen to AoE2 for lots of reasons. However, there are always things one thinks could be better, and there are always people who disagree with the direction the game is taking. So, if you don't mind, I'd like to get your reaction to some of the negative things people have
Yeah,
said about the DE version. And I'll focus mainly on the matchmaking system. Now, unfortunately, with two little kids, I have very little time to play the game. And so, whenever I do have the time, I play only 1v1s. And for my needs, matchmaking works beautifully. I'm a 1600, 1700 player. And even in that elo range, I get a game in 3 minutes max. And in fact, I believe most people are happy with the 1v1 matchmaking. However, things don't seem to work nearly as smooth with the team game matchmaking. So I guess my first question would be, are you guys happy enough with the team game matchmaking? And if not, what do you think needs to change?
there's still changes coming to team game matchmaking. We absolutely recognize that there's issues with it. I think we also communicated about that before, like the whole rating issues. Like we are aware of those. We are
Mhm.
aware of Alt F4. And we are actively working on some improvements there. Will that be magically solved with the next patch? Probably not. Will there be improvements? Certainly.
Mhm.
It's kind of like, well, it's probably something we'll talk about soon as well, is pathfinding. It's one of those things that It's not perfect, but does it improve every patch? Probably.
Mhm.
Um, and it's kind of like that with a lot of areas of the game. Like we're not blind for community reactions, but going from a reaction and analyzing something's bad and why is it bad, to then implementing, testing, and then releasing the solution. Again, with all the constraints I mentioned before,
Mhm.
that can take some time. And yeah, that sometimes makes it look to people in the community like, hey, they're not listening, or they're not doing things, or they're ignoring the problem. Um, I absolutely understand the sentiment.
Mhm.
Absolutely, like totally know where it comes from.
Mhm.
But it's also important. Like we do see it. We absolutely see it, and we are working on it. Maybe not as fast as people would hope it would go, but we're certainly working on it, and
Mhm.
hopefully we can just keep on improving it.
So this is purely anecdotal again and just a personal experience, but I seem to be noticing less people complaining about the pathfinding. Now, I don't know if that's because people are happier with it or if they just stopped complaining about it. That could be an option too. But anyway, you've already touched upon the Alt F4 behavior, and I assume you're not going to say anything further about it. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. So I also heard people complaining about the combination of picking civs and picking positions, killing variety, and probably this is a little bit more true at the higher ratings. What would you say to that?
It's interesting because this was initially something that was requested. Like it was heavily
A
requested in the
lot, a
community.
lot.
Like, hey, we want to be able to do this because that way we can really develop strategies better, team strategies to say like, hey, this is our pocket player, and he's always going to play pocket. He's always going to pick Franks because he wants to go pocket knights. And then we implemented it, but indeed, it comes with a trade-off. All of a sudden, there is one less variable in the game, and yeah, it's certainly on higher levels. You always want to go for the best tactic, and if the best tactic is to always go Frank Pocket Knights, yeah, then we will see more Frank Pocket Knights. Yes.
Mhm.
Um,
I guess the thing here, or the critique, is that this would be a perfectly fine and awesome option for tournament games.
mhm.
But for the latter, that is considered a little bit more casual, that it's probably better to just keep things random. What do you think?
I I'm curious about it. Like I'm not sure if we have data on that. It would certainly be interesting because when you get feedback from the community, the feedback you always get, and this is in any player base ever, for any community, you always hear the bad things, right? If
Mhm.
somebody's happy with how things are right now, they will not talk about it. They will just say like, "Yeah, I'm happy with this." Um, so now we have players voicing discontent with "Hey, I don't like that you can pick this." But maybe there's 100,000 people out there that are very happy
Like it.
with it and are
Mhm.
just not saying anything.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm not entirely sure where we're at this point. Like, are we at the point where most people are saying it's a bad thing, or most people are saying it's a good thing?
Mhm. Mhm.
So we're just not sure where we're at this point.
Yeah,
Can we
that's
change
perfectly
it?
fair.
Certainly, we can change it, but it's yeah, I don't
Mhm.
know.
Yeah, that's totally fair. That's totally fair. Um, you already touched upon the rating problems that we had in the team game ladder, which has caused this huge inflation in rating. Are we looking at a rating reset anytime soon, or you think we don't need that?
um, there needs to be a rating adjustment, that for sure. Um, and we're talking about some solutions there. However, and this is again where we have the thing with parts of the community being vocal about the issues and part of the community not saying anything.
Hmm.
And what we kind of saw here is that as soon as you touch people's rating or you reset it, um, people might not really like that. Like, hey, I've worked so long to get to this rating.
My puntos, my puntos.
Exactly, like, and it's totally fair. Like, if you're a very casual player, you're just playing with a bunch of friends, you get your points, and you're like, oh, from my group of friends, I'm 900, and my friends are only 700. That's amazing. Um, and these more casual players also have probably like they don't really abuse the system. There's no rating inflations for them. For them, it works. But
Hmm.
then to see that reset and yeah, having everybody on the same level again, having to play a game against Viper again, it's
Hmm.
like, oh, do we want to go through that again? So there's a
Hmm.
lot of things we need to weigh against
Difficult
each other
balance. Hmm.
before we can make a call on that. Do we do a reset? Do we do a readjustment? Do we just leave things the way they are? We can't leave things the way they are, just to be clear on that.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, but what the solution will be, it's still a bit, it's still up in the air.
All right. Some folks, and again, I think this is especially true for higher rated players, also complain about the lack of balanced games. And I think this is something to be expected, somewhat expected, because the higher you go in the ladder, the fewer players there are, and the harder it is for the system to find a balanced game. Do you agree this is a problem? And if yes, what kinds of solutions are you looking at?
It's tricky. So on one hand, yes, you're at the grace. Let's say we have 10 or 20 players that are leagues above everybody else. I mean, just look at the tournament. There's always like, let's say, 8 names that you expect and that are always there, and they're
Hmm.
leagues above everybody else.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
for them, obviously, it's going to be much harder to find an even game if none of those 8 players are queuing at the same time. And what is then the solution? Do we go for, let's say, something we've done for deathmatch recently, where we say like, okay, let's do ranked lobbies?
Only for
But is
higher
that
rated
going
players.
right? Is that going to improve it? Because at the same time, you might just be sitting in your lobby for the next hour, waiting for one of those 8 players to come into your lobby. That is something that's, yeah, is that going to be better? Because I actually spoke to some players, I think it was a few months ago, and they were talking about Voobly back in the day, and they did say like, yeah, we had more higher ranked games, but it also took so much longer
Longer.
to
Hmm.
get those higher ranked games.
Yeah.
So
Sorry to
yeah,
interrupt, but because that was the solution I was about to propose.
yeah.
Because at that point, I think that's a personal decision. Do I want to wait a little bit longer, or do I just want to go for a game and I just queue up in the matchmaking system? So if you guys need another voice in favor of that option, I'm totally up for that.
It was
Um,
also like we're whenever we work on these things, we need to say, okay, what is the server technology that we currently have available for this? What does that support? And I think only up till very recently that was supported. And with that match having the issue of like, okay, the queues are not very populated, let's move that to the lobbies. That's a perfect testing point. Like, hey, does
mhm.
that work? Do we see that people engage with it? Is that a good replacement? Um, and if we see that it's functional, then maybe it's something that's worth rolling out for all the game modes as well.
Exploring. Perfect. So, new expansion. The
Yes.
Dawn of the Dukes has now been announced, and the release date is set for August 10th. Would you be willing to share a few more details about the new civs?
Not sure what details I can
Okay,
share.
let me try you. I'll just try
Okay.
you and you just tell me if you can say anything or not. So we know the two new civs. That's going to be the Bohemians and the Poles. So I'll start with the Bohemians. And to me, the most intriguing thing about them seems to be the Hussite wagon. I've paused and I've played it very slowly, the trailer that you guys just released yesterday, I think it was. And I seemed to notice different types of projectiles coming out of them. Can you say something about that?
Yes, indeed. They have a few projectiles going on. It's actually, there's a lot going on with that unit, actually. And it's actually not the projectiles that makes them unique. It's actually, they are some sort of a blocking unit. Uh,
Like a ram?
in a way, so when you have a ram, what it does is if you put it in front of your army and you have your archers or the enemy archers shooting, they will first target the ram, right?
Mhm, mhm.
But if you then micro, you can still say like, oh, there's a knight right behind it.
I know what you're gonna say. Mhm.
Yeah, I'm going to shoot at the knight. What a Hussite wagon does is absorbs incoming arrow fire and will take it no matter what. So that's the big differentiating factor for the Hussite wagon.
That's actually not a new mechanic though, right? Because I
Yeah,
remember people talking about that castles could not target villagers repairing onagers or something. It's got to do with the height of the unit, I believe.
Exactly. So it is something that was in the engine. It was just never explored,
Hmm. Hmm.
and there was only in this niche case with a RAM being repaired that you could see it. So we're like,
Hmm.
hey, what if we actually, yeah, put
Expanded
this out
further.
in the open and do something with it? And it actually worked quite well.
Hmm.
So,
Sounds like every new unit you add to the game sounds really difficult to balance. What costs are we looking at? How much do they cost?
ooh, I would have to check. I don't know from the
All
top of
right.
my head.
Fair enough, fair enough, fair enough.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move on to the other unique unit. I'm gonna butcher this. Of course, the Hufnitzer, no idea. So
Mhm.
that's an upgrade to the bombard cannon. And the bombard cannon is the most expensive unit in the game, right? So are we looking at a very expensive upgrade too for the bombard cannon?
We're mostly looking at a slightly different functionality here.
Mm-hmm.
So the Hufnice is more, it has a bit more splash radius.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more of a, I'm going to say onager slash bombard cannon hybrid. Not completely though. Like, don't imagine that all of a sudden you're having a siege onager with much more range and much more mobility than any other
Mm-hmm.
onager.
Onager.
It certainly still has drawbacks. Uh, it's not a full onager either, but it's certainly what Bohemians would make against archer groups because they don't have siege onagers to help them against that.
Mhm. But just to be sure, that's an upgrade to the bombard cannon. It's not a
Yes,
separate unit.
correct.
Okay, okay. So no siege onagers for the Bohemians. Good to know. We are told they are a monk and gunpowder civ, with excellent bombard cannons, of course.
Mhm.
Perfect arena civ.
Yes, probably. Yes.
So this
It
one came for
was
you. You designed most of it. Admit it.
actually no, I did not. We've had other people in the team stepping up really well with new civilizations. I'm very happy with that. Uh, it's the biggest challenge for the Bohemians was making them work on Arabia because indeed, as soon as you think about monks and gunpowder, you're thinking about late game, and
Hmm.
that's not an Arabia thing.
Yeah.
One of the things we did is gunpowder, so the hand cannoneers are available 1 age earlier for the
Oh, okay.
Bohemians. So to kind of bring that in, but even then, you're still in the castle age. How do the Bohemians fare in the feudal age and
Mhm.
earlier? It took us quite some time, but and also a different way to kind of play. We figured out you can't really play Bohemians like you would play the standard civ, which I'm
Mhm.
actually happy for. Like it's always good to have something that needs to be figured out, but it took us literally months of good players to figure out like, hey, how
Mhm.
can we make them viable? Uh, and in the end, it was funny because we iterated so much, we tried so many bonuses, and in the end, we almost went back to our first iteration because it was not a matter of the bonuses; it was just not us figuring out how to play.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
Again, we'll see what happens on release. Like maybe once Fiber and Hera have a match on that, and they're like, "Oh Jesus, this is completely broken. It's completely
Uh-huh.
OP." It is possible. That's perfectly possible, and we accept that
Mhm.
as well.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
then we can do a balance adjustment in the next patch. So
Mhm.
all good there.
Perfect. The Poles, their unique unit is the Obuch. Again, sorry for the butchering. Um, is it basically the infantry version of the Lightus?
No. So the Obuk has it's when it attacks, it takes away some of the opposing unit's armor. Um, I'm gonna say semi-permanently. What that means is that it takes the armor away. So let's say you're fighting against Elite Eagle Warrior. It has 8 pierce armor.
Hmm.
You do an attack, it takes one away. Do another attack, it takes one away. I'm actually not sure if it's 1 or 2 at this point. But let's say with a bit of attacks, you're down to 4 armor.
Hmm.
Um, at that point, that Eagle Warrior only has 4 armor left. Let's
Interesting.
say
For
you
all the
blend that.
units, or just for the Obuch that's attacking?
Yes, indeed. Like the Obuk attacked that specific unit, and that specific unit now has less armor on it. Um, the only way to regain that armor is by fully healing up the unit. So if you fully
Hmm.
heal it up, it will regain the armor. But other than that, it will stay at 4. Now, what that
Hmm.
means is that specifically in combined sort of army combinations, That's where it gets interesting, because all of a sudden you have your eagles, the ultimate archer character. It all of a sudden only has half of its spear's armor left. If you have a few archers behind that, they can just pick them off
Hmm.
super easily.
Hmm.
Uh, and that's where we see the O-Book coming in mostly. Like it's a strong support unit, but you need to combine it with something. You're not going to make an O-Book army by itself,
Hmm.
but if you combine it with archers or like archers from your teammate, that's where they start to shine.
That sounds incredibly interesting. Now we got the winged hussars as well, and these units are available to the Poles and to the Lithuanians. Now there's a bit of confusion here, I believe. Are these units, do they have better stats than hussars, or are they just a reskin?
No, they do have some slight differences, but I would have to look up exactly how we differentiated between the Poles and the Lithuanians, but they are definitely different. So as soon as you have your light cavalry, both Lithuanians and Poles can upgrade them uh, to winged hussar instead of the normal hussar,
Hmm.
and it has slightly different effects. But I would have to look it up because we iterated so much over last month.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, but I mean something else actually. Do
Okay.
the winged hussars have different stats from the normal, from the
Oh
regular
yes, they do.
hussars?
They
So
do.
they're better units.
They are better units. Yes.
Hmm.
In
Are we
general,
also
yes.
are we also looking at a more expensive upgrade from
I
light
would have
cav
to
to
check.
wing?
I think they
All
are
right,
slightly, but yeah.
all right, all right. So the Poles also have the fall work,
Yes.
and that's a 3x3 mil that is set to increase efficiency. Could you explain how that works? Does it only increase the gather rate of farms touching it? How does that work?
Okay, so there is a radius around the folwark, which is exactly the placement of 8 farms around it. So
Right.
if you just put your 8 farms perfectly around it, that's the most you will get out of the folwark.
Hmm.
And what it does is, as soon as you complete a farm, so you build your farm, you built it completely. At that point, you automatically get a bit of food into your inventory. So that's the bonus that you get
Ah,
from building your own farm.
okay. So it's nothing to do with the gather rate. It's just that initial reward that you get
It's
from
that
making a
initial
farm.
reward, but it really, yeah, it really gives a boost. And also with every reseed of the farm that you do,
Ah,
you
it
get the
comes again.
same little
Interesting.
donation in the bank.
Interesting. What about cost? Is it similar to a mill?
It is a bit more expensive. It costs
Mhm.
25 wood more, but it also gives you 5 population.
Oh wow. Okay. Okay. Interesting. Um, we also get 3 new campaigns for the single player folks right there out there. And with these new civs, we are now at a total of 39 civilizations for Age of Empires 2. Is this one the last expansion we will see for Age of Empires 2?
I've stopped answering that because I've answered that too many times, and
I
every time
expected
I've
as
been
much.
wrong.
I expected as
Yeah,
much. Yeah.
I've been wrong every time. Like I never expected that we would do it for DE either, but DE was yeah, so well received, was such a success that we're like, well, let's go.
It's just how it worked. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to Age of Empires 4. And if I understand things correctly, you are not involved in the development of Age of Empires 4, at least not officially. Is that right?
No, so we are involved.
Hmm.
It was very, very sneakily announced during the interview by Microsoft many months ago, I think,
Hmm.
where I think they were asked exactly the same question, like,
Okay.
"Hey,
Okay.
is Forgotten Empires involved at all?" We are involved, but we're focused on very specific areas of the game. So we're working on Art of War missions for Age of Empires 4, and we're also helping with the balance of the game as well. So
Hmm.
that's where our focus lies. But for all intents and purposes, of course, a Relic in Microsoft or World's Edge
Hmm.
working on the game.
As someone who's been involved in the development of the Age of Empires franchise for such a long time, are you disappointed you weren't given a more prominent role in the creation of Age of Empires 4?
Relic is a company that has been around for, I'm going to say, nearly 30 years. They have, 200 plus people in their company. Forgotten Empires is around for 8 years at this point. We're between 50 and 60 people. I mean,
The
Just that.
scope just doesn't match. Okay.
Exactly. Like if you want to go for a AAA game and give it to a company that has absolutely no experience ever publishing a AAA game, it's just logical.
Hmm.
I mean, was it always my dream to work on on Age of Empires? Yes. Do I want to do more? Yes, absolutely.
Hmm.
But the reality just dictates that you need a big experienced team to work on, the most anticipated title in the franchise. So
Hmm. Hmm.
absolutely understand it.
Okay, let's imagine for a second you were the lead developer of Age of Empires 4.
Mhm.
What would the game look like under your leadership? I mean, what does a modern RTS game need in order to succeed in a time where RTS games are not nearly as popular as they once were?
Ooh, good question. Um, there are a lot of things you can answer that's an hour worth of conversation in itself.
Hmm.
Um,
Give me the short version.
yes, I'll just try to pick some items that I think are
Hmm.
necessary. So one of the things that you just can't ignore is the evolution of strategy games. If you look at how I'm going to say strategy games at large evolved, right? We see MOBAs, we see a lot of variation in those games, and like this traditional core RTS as we know it, like StarCraft type of things or Age of Empires type of things. Haven't seen that in a long time. Am I saying that we need to make a MOBA in Age? No, no. We should not do that. But what are they doing that makes it so
That
successful?
works. Hmm.
What exactly can we take from that? What can we learn from that? One of the things I think are very interesting there is the way they focus on characters. Um, Nowadays, so many games revolve around characters. Back in the day, you had an FPS game, right? And it was, let's say, Doom, and you had Doom Guy, but you had nothing. You had no idea about Doom Guy.
You
There
know
was no
nothing about
story.
him.
There was.
Hmm.
Did he have a personality? No, he just looked angry all the time and was shooting aliens on Mars. Um, but nowadays they have a story and there's more going on, and that lures in so many people. Like you feel
Hmm.
connected to the player, you feel connected to the character. There's a story you get involved with, and I would love to see an Age of Empires game evolve more in that direction as well. Like when Joan of Arc is burning at the stake, make me cry,
Hmm.
make me feel
Hmm.
it, make me feel sad for losing for La Douce France. Like
Hmm.
make me feel it. And I think there's a lot of space that is kind of undiscovered there
Hmm.
within Age of Empires and just storytelling.
Hmm. It's a very interesting point. Um, I guess in the case of Age of Empires, one would need to focus more on civs or on countries or on empires instead of singular individuals, right? Because you're controlling several individuals at the end of the day.
It's just the way you approach it. There's many ways you can do that. Right? Like in multiplayer, of course, that's never
Hmm.
really going to be a thing. You can't put a single character that you follow in a multiplayer game. But for example, can you put a hero in there? Like, can you make
Hmm.
a hero part of that? For example,
Hmm.
in Age of Empires 3, you had kind of the explorer type, which was like a hero type of unit
Hmm. Hmm.
that worked well within the gameplay. Can an RTS use it as well? I think you can. There's a lot of design space there that is unexplored, um, but it's mostly about campaign, absolutely, but also in single player. Like in single player, how do you engage with an AI? Is it
Hmm.
a lifeless being that just executes orders, or is it something that talks to you? Is it something
Hmm.
that throws banter at you? Age of Empires tried to explore that area a bit. Age of Empires 3, sorry. Um, People have their opinions about it,
To
but
differing opinions, yeah.
it definitely explored it,
Hmm.
and it certainly makes the game come more to life if
Hmm.
you do it well.
Hmm.
And I think that's also something, you can do there.
Perfect. If Age of Empires 4 does succeed at a large scale, are you
Mhm.
afraid it could pull players away from AoE 1, 2, and 3?
Um, Only time can tell. Only time can tell. Like there's two theories, right? Like one is lifting tides rises no rising tides lifts all boats.
Hmm.
Um, I personally like to think that that might be the case. Like, hey, people have more visibility on Age of Empires, and all of a sudden there's more play for all the games.
There's enough
Uh,
precedence for believing that, right? I mean, I've mentioned before the case of HD and Voobly. When
mhm.
HD came out, Voobly's numbers on Voobly shot up
Yeah.
really massively, right? Interesting. Last question, Bert. You've now been working on RTS games for over 10 years. Is there another genre of video games you would like to work on in the future?
Um, I think I definitely gonna stick to strategy games at this point. There's
Okay.
just every day you still learn new things, um, and that's not an exaggeration. That's just reality. There's so much more to explore, so much more to learn. Do I play older games in my free time? In my little free time that I have that are not strategy games? Yes, I do.
Mhm. What
Is
games?
it? Sorry.
What games?
Sometimes I like to play Trackmania, which is a racing game.
Hmm. Hmm.
I love the Tony Hawk series as
Wow.
well.
Okay. Cool.
It's like, I mean, I suck at skateboarding. I've been a skateboard once in my life, but I love the Tony Hawk games.
Uh-huh.
And then there's Roller Coaster Tycoon. I love
Tycho.
simulation games as well.
Hmm.
Um, but to see myself working on those, that's a whole new stretch.
Not yet.
So yeah,
Mhm. Bert, thank you so much for your time, man. I really appreciate the openness. This was really fun. Thank you so much.
yeah, you're welcome. Thanks.